Okay, y'all, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. I'm excited to be joined by some great thought leaders in this space to dive deeper into AI Factory. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. On the top right, you will see a doc section. This has relevant documents to this specific session. Please go ahead and check those out. These will be available to you during the presentation and post-presentation. Following this session, we will be sending out the recording. Keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for that link. This will be the recorded session as well as the presentation deck. I do want to call out some links in the doc section specifically. We are excited to be sponsoring GTC this year. Feel free to schedule time with both Deloitte and VAST to talk in person about AI Factory, as well as register for our joint happy hour on Tuesday, March 18th. Lastly, if you have any questions during the session, please put those in the Q&A section. You will see the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Your questions will appear once it has been approved. If you'd like to submit your questions anonymously, you can do that by checking the Hide Name box at the bottom of the panel. We want this session to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask questions and share your thoughts throughout the presentation. Today, I will be joined by Steve Brown, Managing Director of AI and Data Operations at Deloitte, as well as Niloy, Director of Solutions Engineering, HPC and AI, and our moderator, John Mao, VP of Business Development and Alliances. I'd like to introduce everyone to John Mao. John, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to today's session. We're super excited to be here and joined, like Christina said, with both Niloy and Steve. So hopefully this will be a wonderful conversation. Again, if you guys have questions, we'd love to take some of your questions live at the end of today's sessions. Today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what an AI factory is, and more importantly, why should you be thinking about an AI factory for your organization, for your business. We also want to show you a little bit about what it takes to build an AI factory, what goes inside, what makes it really optimized for some of these AI initiatives that might be taking off within your organization. And we'll give a little bit of preview into what VAST has been doing with Deloitte specifically around AI factories, and something that we've launched recently together with Deloitte, just I think last month. I think more interesting, we're going to showcase some of the customer use cases that we've been starting to participate in and work on together with Deloitte, wide ranging in terms of use cases, industry segments, et cetera. So, and again, if you guys have questions, if there are any questions, please feel free to post them. We'd love to answer some of them and chat about some of them later today. So let's get started. Steve, I know you guys are at Deloitte, obviously working with thousands of clients all around the world. You have a very unique perspective on where the state of AI is across many different industries and enterprises. Maybe you can kind of kick us off and talk a little bit about what you guys are observing, what you're seeing, and then take us into kind of the definition of what AI Factory is and what we're here to talk about today.
Sure. Thanks, John. Really appreciate being here, and thanks for the time. So as you say, at Deloitte, we are working with a lot of clients, both in the commercial and the government sectors, that are in various states along the AI continuum. They are either starting POCs, they are actively thinking about how to leverage AI across their enterprise, and or they're at some point along scaling AI across the enterprise. And it does vary quite a bit in terms of which industry you're in, which country you're in terms of the difference between doing POCs and figuring out what I want to do with AI and how it's going to impact my enterprise and my clients and customers, to those clients and customers that are already somewhere along the journey of scaling AI. And this first slide is a little telling, which is for a lot of the POCs, the proof of concepts we see in the marketplace, again, regardless of industry, over 90% of them never get to scale. And there's a wide variety of reasons for that. One is that either the POC did not meet expectations in terms of its commercial impact, or the business case didn't work out, or they all of a sudden realize how much data is required to run this particular use case at scale, or they see risks in terms of a use case presenting risk to the business that they did not really see before the actual proof of concept. So there's a tremendous amount of experimentation going on in the marketplace. The vast majority of that is happening in public cloud providers, which is exactly where it should be happening. But more and more clients are coming out of POCs and saying, we need to understand more broadly, how are all the agentic use cases that we're thinking about can impact our enterprise beyond just a single POC, but also what do I need to support an AI enterprise where I've got multiple agents running around the enterprise, and more scaling of data and more scaling of people who have to understand how to utilize this technology. So what happens when, the challenges we're seeing for clients that are coming out of the POC stage and actually coming into a scaling stage, we're seeing, three big challenges as to why AI is not taking hold quite yet or quite so fast. One is the technology skills. The technology skills to actually develop these AI agents and run them from an infrastructure perspective are fairly unique. And they're also very much obviously in demand. So actually getting access to the right skills to do this is a challenge. The second is gaining access to the compute necessary to run these agents at scale with the data requirements they have. It is scarce. So the cloud providers are struggling to provide that much capacity at scale, and there's a wide variety of archetypes for infrastructure that are coming to market to actually fill that gap around how do I scale these from an infrastructure perspective, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then lastly, we're seeing a huge uptick in the need for data and compute sovereignty, where an infrastructure provider or an infrastructure option can guarantee that both the data and compute stays in the country or stays in the region, and can make sure that those are well protected, and that while you still have all the connectivity to all the other things outside of your region, specific workloads, specific data sets stay in a very specific geographic area. And we're seeing a lot of our clients wanting to make sure that occurs, not only for regulatory issues, but also for latency issues and obviously privacy of their constituents. And then comes the sticker shock, which is the tagline on here, which is this stuff is expensive. And as clients start to look at, and we help clients look at the infrastructure options to support large scale AI workloads, it does get very expensive very quickly. And we start looking at how do we optimize, not just for technical performance, but we optimize also for cost, and making sure we balance those two based upon what the enterprises are willing to deal with in terms of on-prem versus off-prem, and also what they need to deal with for sovereignty. So the balance of cost and performance is coming as much more important versus just the first three challenges as well. So what we have done at Deloitte to address most of these challenges is to think through the challenges and how do we help our clients balance that performance and cost metric. So silicon to service is a nomenclature we gave to say, look, you have to look at the entire stack of things you want to do and required to do to actually host and run AI at scale in order to get the right balance of those factors. So we put together what we call an optimized stack. We actually we are fans of eating our own cooking. So rather than just have a PowerPoint discussion, we actually put together a number of technical environments with a pre-configured stack from AI use cases through data management, through data pipeline, through infrastructure management, down into the actual infrastructure, to show how these various archetypes or infrastructure options operate, how they perform technically, and how they perform from total cost of ownership. And we've actually looked at and come up with a couple of different options that show there's significant differential between the options between cloud providers, OEMs, on-prem, and NVIDIA cloud providers in terms of performance and cost. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what it really does is show that the ROI that you can get for some of these archetypes is in months and not years. You can actually stand up workloads extremely quickly in an optimized environment. And at the same time, you accelerate the skills that you have in-house to rapidly be able to deploy these models. So what I'm showing here is a conceptual stack of the various things that every client would need to do or have some version of in order to run large-scale AI workloads. And I'm going to walk you through it quickly, layer by layer. The top layer is around AI services, which is essentially, think of that as the application layer. You have a variety of LLM models. You have a variety of machine learning models and AI models that you want to deploy. That's defined in that top layer. And where Deloitte can help is where we bring industry expertise and industry knowledge about what's applicable to your industry and valuable to your industry, and also a wide variety of developing those models in terms of the services we can provide. Next is around AI enablement, which is you need to have a layer below the applications that helps you manage the data, that helps you incubate these ideas quickly, that you can bring industry-specific solutions to the table that are predefined or pre-coded, if you will, that you can leverage. So this is a layer that actually enables the top layer to be much more efficient. And then below that, you have a set of services called managed services, where we can actually help clients do this on an ongoing basis beyond just a single project, but as to actually be part of their COE, to actually run over a multiple year period, to actually drive these types of use cases to the market. Then below that, you have infrastructure. So to support all of those use cases you're developing and the data management services you have on the top part of the diagram, you also have to have an infrastructure layer that supports it. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is we're seeing a number of different archetypes of infrastructure options emerge in the marketplace. And I'll go from right to left in this particular one. There's obviously the public cloud providers. They are the first choice for POCs. They are the first choice for experimentation. That's exactly where it should be happening. What we're seeing, though, is that as you start to scale workloads in the public cloud providers, the costs do start to rise pretty quickly. And I can tell you that a number of clients have come to us saying that their public cloud costs are really high. They're getting a little bit out of control, and what options do we have to discuss that could reduce the cost but still give them some type of technical performance that is acceptable to them, and also what kind of sovereign requirements they have. So now we move one click to the left. We look at pre-built. There's a number of pre-built providers that are coming out with appliance-based systems and pre-built systems. That includes HPE and Dell and Equinix. They are coming out with predefined systems that are great for mostly smaller workloads in general. But they're easy to put in, they're easy to install. They incorporate compute, network, and storage. They're all in a box, small, medium, and large sizes, and they're generally fairly cost effective. What we're also seeing is a lot of colo providers come to market with the solutions. Equinix is probably the best example of that. And we're also seeing a lot of NVIDIA cloud providers come with cloud capability that is local to a region and a country, but also extremely cost effective. And that's actually where we did our first piece of experimentation with VAST and Run AI. We actually stood up an optimized workload stack that includes data ingestion. It includes cross-platform compute and data management, and includes infrastructure management. And we stood this up with VAST and with Run AI and NVIDIA. And we actually benchmarked this by putting through several kinds of workloads. We put a training workload through it, and we put a RAG workload through it. And we benchmarked it against a major cloud provider. And I'll talk about the results of that in a minute, but we're also currently benchmarking that same technical stack in another cloud provider, as well as for a colo location for a FedRAMP certified Equinix data center in Virginia. So when we talk about this entire stack, all built on NVIDIA AIE, this is what we mean by silicon to service. We need, as clients look at AI workloads, they need to think about all of these layers in terms of how they're going to enable them across the enterprise. And that is what presents the challenge for them in terms of both how am I going to develop the right kind of use cases at the top part of the stack, and how am I going to support them from the infrastructure part of the stack in a performance and cost-effective way.
I think I wanted to touch on something there, just if you don't mind me jumping in. Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started engaging, it was interesting because VAST has had a good amount of success over the last 18, 24 months in that kind of optimized bucket that you draw, that little box that you show here. VAST has seen quite a bit of success in the NVIDIA cloud partner space, right? I think we're counting 30 plus service providers all around the world where we now have an optimized at the infrastructure level available for partners like Deloitte to come and add in additional capabilities, right? So I think it's super important you're talking about not only is it the infrastructure managed services, but it's also the operational piece and then the application piece, right? That has to complete the entire stack. And then before we move on to the last slide, I wanted to maybe ask Neil, because he gets around the world talking to a lot of these customers like I do. And you talked about, Steve, a couple of problems that you see, cost being one of them, right? The sticker shock that comes. There's also a skills gap. There's also data sovereignty considerations, right? There's also a whole host of just access to accelerated compute infrastructure these days is not a given, right? I mean, Neil, what of those four or maybe others, what are you seeing thematically as you talk to different organizations, both service providers and enterprises? What is the biggest challenges or challenges that they're encountering in day to day?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is the model for an enterprise AI application is very different than the models that people have been used to historically, right? You go back to on-premise software. You would buy a software package from a vendor. They would give you a guide on how to configure it, how to size it. You deploy it, right? And then came the cloud providers. And you also had this approach where you would essentially pick a cloud provider and they'd give you a roadmap to, hey, here's how you deploy this application. Here's how it scales, sizes, et cetera. I think the interesting thing about AI applications and why this partnership with Deloitte has been so interesting is that roadmap doesn't exist, especially if a client is trying to scale a end user facing application from an AI standpoint, right? They have all of those challenges. It's not that one is worse or better than the other. They have to solve all of them. And that can be very challenging for an enterprise user. And that's where I think Silicon to Service and the work that we've been doing has been helpful in customers. Or, my first reaction I get whenever I introduce this conversation is, wow, there's actually a roadmap here. There's actually something I could see consuming that helps me have, deploy these AI applications in a manner similar to the way I'm used to deploying my traditional applications.
Yeah, and Neil, I'd like to sort of riff on that a little bit. Is that the other difference, or one of the key differences you pointed out between this and more traditional applications, is that the integration across the client's value chain is not there out of the box. And so I'll give you a real example. We're working with a large global client where they gave us the challenge. They gave Deloitte the challenge to say, we love what you're talking about in terms of how generative AI can impact our business. Here's a challenge for you, and tell us how it would work. The challenge they have is the time from, and they're a products company, the time from the time we ideate and identify what we think is a good idea for a new product to the time we actually get it out the door to our clients is over 18 months. And that's way too long. So help us understand how a generative AI approach could shrink that time. And so what we did was we designed a number of agents, not just one, but a number of them, an agent that helped across the entire value chain. So for example, we had an agent that helped them do new product ideation, an agent that took a new product idea, compared it to all the existing products they have to say, what's the difference between this and all the other stuff I make, and what's a potential bill of materials to actually build this new product. Then it takes that, passes it to a supply chain agent, that the agent actually says, it looks at their capacity across their supply chain, their manufacturing capacity, to see where could they build this, what's the machinery necessary to build it based upon the bill of materials, and what's the gaps or issues they need to address. And then the last one is a finance bot that actually looks at the entire value chain based on the data those produced to say, what's the cost of this? How much is it going to cost me to actually build this new product? So not only did we actually shrink the time down from 18 months to 6 months, we actually showed that there's integration necessary between data being passed across silos to actually drive that value chain result at the end. One individual agent couldn't do it, but when you put them together and pass the data from one to the other, it shows how it can dramatically, give business results. But again, that integration doesn't exist out of the box. You actually have to build it, so that data flow has to occur across multiple data silos, and likely mostly where the data is actually stored. So physical data storage archetypes have to come together. And again, that's where I think VAST can bring a tremendous amount of value to our clients.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, right? Where on one hand you have to have very concrete business case, concrete specific project and goals defined to get started, but at the same time, the wide sweeping benefits of AI could really stretch across an entire organization, and you could deal with lots of increasing scope as well, which is, I think, a great thing in the long run. So anyway, the silicon to service, Steve, we've done some work, and you guys have already actually done some modeling, but maybe we can kind of wrap up this first section and talk a little bit about what is some of the outcomes. What should customers, especially executives and stakeholders, look to kind of get out of partnering with Deloitte and VAST on this?
So thanks, John. So when we did our benchmarking that I mentioned earlier, we actually saw some fairly dramatic results. We saw a dramatic result in terms of total cost of ownership between these two models could be as much as 40 to 50% different, especially at scale. So when I say at scale, which means I'm not just doing POCs, I'm ingesting huge amounts of data, I'm consuming a fair bit of compute, and I'm starting to have multiple agents working multiple use cases. We start to see total cost of ownership get driven between 40 and 50% cheaper in one of these archetypes. Performance can be up to 30 or 40% better, and I think from inferencing we're going to talk more about that's even more dramatic. And when you put together the stack in an optimized environment, you can actually onboard new use cases very rapidly, 4 to 5 weeks, because the stack has now been built and optimized to actually ingest data and run use cases. The other that's interesting thing is that we saw is really important is to be able to access data anywhere of any modality, so that we want to be able to ingest not just PDF and text, but voice, video, radar, any other types of data. We want to be able to ingest them fairly transparently and quickly. And we're currently working with a number of startups with you to experiment with different types of technologies to ingest different types of data very, very effectively. But we also want to make sure we can get access to it on any platform anywhere, as opposed to being tied to a specific platform. Because as I mentioned, the world in the future is going to be a hybrid world. That it's going to mix and match different technical infrastructure archetypes to maximize performance and total cost of ownership. Well, I want to make sure I can get control and data flow or data access across all those archetypes, and I don't give myself barriers that I have to deal with and silos need to deal with. So a lot of the work that we've done together over the past year has demonstrated that we can indeed do that, and indeed do that in a way that is highly performative and cost effective.
Yeah, it's been a pretty fun year. Niloy, why don't we start transitioning and talk a little bit, just give the audience a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, on silicon to service. We've been working with Steve and the entire Deloitte team on this. You personally as well, right? On this for the last year or so. Maybe you can kind of walk us through a little bit about what's VAST's role. I know some people may be new to VAST. Some people may have known VAST from years ago, right? And haven't seen, but VAST is obviously building a different trajectory in terms of our product and capabilities and our direction. So maybe you can kind of cover a little bit of both of that as we kind of dig into the AI factory and what is VAST's position and role in all of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, VAST is, just earlier last year or late last year, we launched this concept of Insight Engine, right? Which was our latest innovation in continuing to build a rich services layer on top of the data layer. So John, as you mentioned, many people know us from the data side, right? They know that we store unstructured and structured data. We're very efficient at minimizing data movement. But with Data Engine and with Insight Engine, VAST has entered sort of a next level of its journey in enabling people to run both CPU and GPU centric functions against their data where their data exists, right? That I think is the big differentiator compared to what people are used to seeing in their environments. So, this concept of hybrid has been around for some time, right? Hybrid cloud was certainly a thing. But as I mentioned earlier, I think people struggled sometimes to have that blueprint that really enabled them to consume hybrid cloud efficiently, right? There was always this cost of moving from one cloud to another, whether it was private to public or between public providers. That was hard for people to justify the benefits of doing that. AI changes all of that, right? So when you look across this slide, it speaks to the complexity of the functions required to successfully deploy an AI workload. So on the left-hand slide, you have the SaaS providers, right? All of which have become AI enabled. Certainly Salesforce has leaned into it heavily, ServiceNow has leaned into it heavily, and almost all of the SaaS providers are looking to offer some sort of agentic workflow. You have the data that you've already moved into cloud, whether it's in native cloud storage, Snowflake, Databricks, you have a number of options there. And then quite candidly, customers have a chunk of data that sits still on premise. And then as Steve was mentioning, you've got these boutique service providers that have emerged that offer a lot of GPU capacity, but of course don't have any of your data because your data lives in the other locations, right? So how do you pull all of these together to deliver an AI application, right? To really AI enable the way your company does business. And Steve, I think your example there was spot on. It's not one agent. It's not one application running in one location where all of your data lives. That's just not the reality, right? The reality is it is multiple agents collaborating to solve a problem. Some of them are going to be SaaS hosted agents that belong, that are sitting side by side with your data that's sitting on the SaaS platform. Some of that is going to run in the hyperscalers, as Steve mentioned, and we've done a ton of work with the hyperscalers. We both have strong partnerships. Some of those workloads, you essentially want to just be able to linearly scale your GPU consumption at the hyperscaler. But then you also have to deal with your data that's on premise and for one reason or another hasn't been moved, as well as getting access to those GPUs at the hyperscale, at the boutique CSPs. And so that's really where this notion of the VAST Insight Engine plays into this solution, right? What VAST Insight Engine enables you to do is run all of your GPU-enabled functions in those three locations. So the data that sits at the hyperscaler gets processed at the hyperscaler. The data that sits on premises gets processed on premises. Any data that's being generated or stored at the boutique CSPs or in a sovereign cloud provider stays in that location. And across the AI layer, right, the agents and the various NVIDIA NIMs that are offering various degrees of functionality, those are now able to communicate with each other without having to move the data. And this is just a very different motion than people have been used to. It used to be, oh, I have to move my data first before I can start doing these value-added functions against it. And with the technologies, of all the partners that Deloitte has pulled together, VAST included, we're able to provide a whole new paradigm to these clients for how they can deploy and scale these AI applications.
Yeah, I think that data replication or making data copies has been a huge problem. Right? You end up creating all of these different data silos by trying to move the data to where the compute is, right? In this case, like if it's with a CSP or an NCP, right? Moving the data there is sometimes not feasible, right? For a variety of reasons. Maybe it's for sovereignty reasons, but maybe it's just the sheer volume. And maybe in some cases, you don't know what subset of that data is actually needing to be inferred on or leveraged or used. And so having some kind of intelligence there is hugely important. For those of you who don't know, Insight Engine is something that we actually announced in partnership with NVIDIA last October, if I remember correctly. And we'll be making a bunch of actual product announcements as we launch this solution next week. In fact, we're recording this 1 week. We're broadcasting right now live, but we're recording this 1 week before GTC, which is NVIDIA's big conference. We'll be showing a lot more details around Insight Engine, but I think in a nutshell, just for those who aren't familiar with it, the core of Insight Engine is effectively an event-driven architecture that takes a data-centric approach to AI, right? So in other words, if you think about data being kind of the starting point for where AI begins. We've built a lot of capabilities into Insight Engine that use the fact of how do we handle real-time data ingestion, right? How do we then invoke specific AI functions, regardless of where that compute may live, to take advantage of these hybrid architectures, to be able to index and to be able to vectorize and embed a lot of this data to make it searchable, to make it retrievable, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that applies across a whole host of different data types. So stay tuned. If you're not super up to speed on VAST and Insight Engine, I hope you can check us out next week and check out some of the announcements. There'll be more to come. But on that note, why don't we pivot into, because I think this architecture does play a significant role in a lot of the different use cases and customers that we've already begun working with Steve and team at Deloitte. So I don't actually know who's going to take this one, but I'm going to go to Niloy first. Why don't you talk us through some of the common use cases first that we've been seeing, and then we can have an open conversation with Steve about what they're seeing as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And as Steve alluded to earlier, just earlier this year, we launched the AI Factory, and this was one of the marquee use cases that was out there. It's a fairly popular use case, right? It's a pretty obvious one, but it being popular or obvious doesn't make it easy to deliver. We know this firsthand. Especially when you want to scale this to petabytes of data, tens of thousands of documents that are changing in real time, your experience becomes very poor if either the retrieval side or even frankly the ingestion side starts to take minutes to hours. Then the relevancy of the data that's being shared it's no longer relevant, right? And so we created this pipeline. One that can be connected to any number of traditional enterprise data sources, whether it's file shares or existing object stores or SharePoint or OneDrive or Google Drive or Confluence, your Slack channels, any number of traditional places where enterprise data lives. And then kind of as John was explaining, the data lands on the platform. It triggers an event-driven pipeline that naturally scales up and down, that gets the data prepared, sanitized, redact PII, make sure permissions aren't being circumvented, and those are being tracked all the way along the way, and then creates these embeddings, within seconds, so that data is now available to any user that is interacting with the model. On the retrieval side, we are able to scale this workload over multiple service providers, and essentially, regardless of which service provider is being used to provide that inferencing capability, because of the Insight Engine, everybody has access to those embeddings in real time, right? You're not having to go to a centralized location that becomes a bottleneck. That the vector database and the ability to retrieve those embeddings is also distributed, and you can obtain those in real time. So covers a large number of industries and use cases. Steve, I don't know if you want to touch on one or two in particular, but I know we've had a broad range of conversations.
Yeah, Niloy, you're right. This is typical across industries. So when we think about the use cases of this pipeline, it's pretty applicable to any large scale ingestion of data, and then putting inferencing on top of that. Think of insurance records or legal documents or any kind of specifications that you've got. I mean, one client we talked to said that they would love to be able to ingest all of the user manuals and bills of materials for all the spare parts they sell in a manufacturing environment, ingest all of that and be able to run, a RAG pipeline on top of that, not just for themselves, frankly, but for their customers who are inquiring about, getting spare parts and replacement parts for things in a very easy way. So, I want to highlight two things you mentioned, Niloy. One is the ability to actually detect when a source data has changed. And know that I've got to have a RAG call to go out and get the most recent data versus when the source data has not changed and I don't need to do that. that increases the efficiency of this pipeline incredibly, especially for largely dynamic data. So if I need to go off and research have a RAG call back out to the existing data because it's changed versus it's static, it's fine, I can give the answer I already have trained the model on. Number one. Number two is at the point you brought up earlier in terms of all this data exists in very disparate places physically, and this, the Insight pipeline allows you to go across all of those to ingest the data is very important. And then lastly, you said something at the outset was pretty easy to say, but this is not easy, is what you said. And we found that out that this is not easy. This is something that as different providers and different there's a ton of different companies coming into this space. For those that are looking at how to put together an optimized AI stack, my one piece of advice would be know how hard this stuff is, and it's different and it moves around a lot. So it's always evolving. Number one. Number two is a lot of the software products coming to market are not necessarily that mature, and they do have bugs. And so as you look through it, it's always good to actually run the optimized workloads like we did together, to actually work through all of that and say, this is now working well. It's well-oiled machine versus 9 months ago when we're integrating all of this stuff and making it work. It's hard. And so don't let anyone tell you that you can do 3 clicks and all of a sudden you've got a RAG pipeline up and running. No, I haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing. Yeah, sorry. It's one thing to, download some sample code and prove I can do this in 3 clicks, but there's another thing to actually bake in all of an enterprise's requirements around security and, governance and all these other things that also have to go into it, and I think, these are very horizontal technologies, right? In the sense that if we can analyze text, documents, manuals, et cetera, but also videos, right? We're seeing a lot of focus on video-based vision models today. And you think about it, we are working with a media entertainment company right now, but think about where video vision models could come into play, even beyond things like robotics and self-driving vehicles. I'm talking things like around retail and manufacturing and logistics and smart cities and on and on and on and on. The applicability here is super, super wide. And while they all follow kind of a general technology pattern, there's a lot of nuance there, right? So it's not always a 3-click download the app store, from the app store and call it a day kind of thing. So sorry, Neil, I cut you off. You wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to emphasize. So I caught a question in the Q&A that I wanted to speak to live. And Steve, you'd mentioned this earlier. Mark was asking about regulated industries and sensitive data. And I think one of the things that between Deloitte, VAST, and NVIDIA we've done is embrace a number of partnerships that solve those types of problems, right? So both the S2S as well as Insight Engine are, at the end of the day, platforms which can leverage partner technologies to solve specific issues, right? We have a partner in that platform that helps deal with the obfuscation of data, right? So if you don't want your questions and your responses to be sent in clear text to the service provider, right, that you're using for inference, there's technologies that help do that. There are technologies in the platform that help with partitioning of data in order to accelerate the pipelines and ingestion. So I think it's one of the cool things is, as I said at the beginning, we're able to leverage this offering from Deloitte to really offer blueprints to clients for how you pull all these technologies together versus leaving them to have to figure that out on their own.
Yeah, Neil, just one further point on the sensitive data and sovereign data you were pointing out. It's also key, Mark, that you can prove it through audit, so that it's not just this is how the technology works, this is how we keep it private, but you have to make it auditable, so that over a period of time you can continuously prove to a government or to a sovereign agency that the data and compute has stayed resident to where it's supposed to stay.
That's huge. We have an ongoing POC right now where we've had to demonstrate just that, right? Be able to prove that every single action, from where the data was sent from an inferencing perspective to who was accessing the data afterwards to who was querying the embeddings, right? All of that needs to be audited in regulated industries, and that's something that VAST has also been thinking about working on for many years now. And we have a lot of mechanisms within the broader VAST data platform that make that a lot simpler as well. So, all right, performance.
Yeah, no, I think this is important, right? As I said earlier, it's one thing to have a POC type environment where you've got a small group of users and they're early adopters, so they're tolerant of latency and these types of things. And it's quite another thing to promote something into production where it is end customer facing, right? Our clients' customers are relying on it for whatever business function or interaction they do with the client. And so not only do you need performance, but you also need assurance that as you have your peaks and valleys of consumption, that you are staying efficient on how you're delivering that performance, right? Nobody has the luxury of spinning up thousands or tens of thousands of GPUs just to be on standby, right? As Steve said early on, cost matters. And so, here's some benchmarking that we did with that LLM use case, demonstrating both the ability to, average query response times as far as getting overall end-to-end workflow. So this involves inferencing, understanding the problem, retrieving the data, compiling it into a English, commonly understood response, and presenting that back to the user. And then there's some drill downs on, the key pieces of that, right? How quickly can we get to that first token? How many tokens per second are we delivering? From the VAST side, we actually had a blog post recently talking about this whole concept of undivided attention and some of the innovation that we've been doing in partnership with NVIDIA and our other partners to really make it so that time to first token, right? That sometimes very heavy prompt that guides the way that the LLM answers that is able to be retrieved very quickly, so that time first token can continue to be driven down. Steve, I don't know any other thoughts you had on this?
Yeah, so a couple of things when we did this benchmarking that was actually pleasantly surprising. One is that you'll see the notation on the left hand side. It says 20 or 30 queries. Is that we actually have maintain context for the prompts all the way down to 20 and 30 levels in terms of ongoing questions and re-questions and answering for clarification to make sure that the performance stood up and maintained context all the way through that stream, and it did. And so you'll see the performance metrics here. The other important thing you'll see here is that we measured the performance with guardrails. We used NVIDIA's guardrail product, NIMS, to say if an inappropriate question gets asked, it catches it and does not answer it. So we want to make sure that guardrails were in place so that where inappropriate questions and responses were not given. And the last thing I'll point out in terms of cost matters that you mentioned, Niloy, is because of this type of performance, besides this type of technical efficiency, you're right. The infrastructure you need to support this in an optimized environment requires less GPU capacity. So therefore, you don't have to spend more money on either GPU hours if you're renting it or the GPUs that you buy, so to actually get the same level of performance. So this type of inferencing performance is extremely important, not just only in terms of technically meeting the user's requirements, but also helping the CFO's budget in terms of what kind of money they're spending on GPU capacity.
That predictability of spend, knowing that each interaction is going to cost me X end to end, is so critical, right? Just getting a per GPU hour cost or a per million tokens cost is meaningless to the CFO, right? They really need to understand what's each interaction going to cost, and then I can start to budget and plan. So in addition to that use case, we are actually on the cusp of launching some additional use cases. Once again, as Steve explained, with the AI Factory, we work very closely with our clients to essentially understand what their specific needs are. And then as we find repeated patterns, we try to package those up to even further accelerate time to value for clients. And this has been an interesting one that's emerged more and more. I think no surprise to the audience. self-driving, robotics, all of these trends are very relevant, especially as people start to look at generative AI. We're actually at Human X this week, and there's all sorts of little robots and critters and delivery vehicles crawling around the show floor, highlighting how AI and generative AI and its creative problem solving really works to help these different use cases. When it comes to training these models, though, it's a very complicated environment, right? Not only do you need to be able to create a bunch of synthetic data that creates the behavior or exemplifies and describes the behaviors that you want the system to follow, but you also need to do software in the loop and hardware in the loop simulation, right? You need to actually test the models that are being created extensively, especially if it's in any sort of environment where it's going to be interacting in the wild with regular consumers, right? And so this notion of hybrid training, right, being able to use one hyperscaler or one CSP for synthetic data generation, for going over your prompt logs and finding out what worked well, what didn't. Another environment where you have at scale access to GPUs, right? Once again, we're talking 10, 20, 30, 40,000 GPUs in some cases to train very large complex models that then get quantized and distilled down. But then be able to do those simulations requires having data sets that are common across all of these environments. And as John mentioned, sometimes these data sets are very large and very difficult if you have to move them in bulk from one location to another. And so that's where we've been working on this blueprint and beta testing it with some of our clients to really make it so that the amount of data movement between these various environments is minimized. And we're only sharing the most important data. We're only moving the most important data from one environment to another. Steve, John, if you want to chime in with anything else there.
I think you nailed it.
All right. And this is another one. I know everybody has had an IVR experience to reminisce about and to share. I think when we talk to our clients, they're all looking at various uses of AI in these real-time coaching, agent type interaction scenarios. Human touch matters. People still want to talk to people. Machines, at least yet, don't sound the same as people. But one of the areas that generative AI has definitely been helping a lot of these clients is by coaching the associate, right? And this works in customer service, this works in sales, this works in a large number of different use cases where as the customer is talking to the associate, you've essentially got machine learning models that are not only transcribing the speech, but are also listening for sentiment, right? Is the person on the other end getting frustrated? Are there things that we could retrieve, right, from our repository of training materials as well as historical logs of interactions that we can prompt the associate with, right? Now, hey, in the past we've done this and that's worked better. Maybe you should suggest this, right? And so this is another area where real time is very, very important, right? Getting the prompt 5 minutes after the customer or the client has started to get frustrated is completely useless, right? So this is an area where we're working with our clients to build these solutions, and they're able to actually use the AI factory to take their historical transcripts and coaching materials, prompt associates, still preserve the human interaction, reduce the overall time to completing the activity, whether it's customer support or whether that's a sales activity, and generally having a more satisfied customer. So, we're not quite at the stage where, machines can have the same banter that people on a call can have, but at least we can leverage generative AI to improve those efficiencies and improve the experiences that customers are having.
We can all hope that day comes sooner rather than later. So I think I've been on lots
Yeah,
of customer support calls myself.
a couple comments on that, Niloy. Again, as you say, we've all experienced it, right, for both good and bad. But what this also addresses is, the customer service agents. There's a fair degree of high turnover typically in that position. So the assistant is always great for associates that are new to the position and need the help, right? It's also a great tool to train those new associates. You can do simulations with the associate with a large language model, so you actually get them up the learning curve faster. What it also helps a lot is with your more experienced agents, those that actually do have the experience and have creative solutions to problems. That teaches the model new ways of doing things. So you're constantly retraining the model based on actually what occurs with your most experienced agents. So there's those three dimensions play into it as well. But John, I'll give you an example of some work that we did with a client with a hospital application where they were actually interacting with an agent, but the agent was, an avatar. So there was not an associate driven, it was avatar driven, using same kind of model that Niloy is talking about. It was for a very specific domain. It was very specific. It was preoperative questions. So patients that are about to have, an operation, a very specific set of operations, they have preoperative questions. They can ask this agent, what should I eat or not eat the day before surgery? What can I expect for pain after surgery? What, can I drink anything before surgery? Can I have coffee or tea? I mean, those sorts are very, very common questions. The avatar would be able to answer them. And what was interesting about it was when they actually deployed it, to interact with real patients, the customer satisfaction was extremely high. Because the agent had no time pressure. You could ask all the questions you want for as long as you wanted. And what the agent also did was, if it could not answer a question or is outside of its bounds, it set up an appointment, with a nurse or a medical practitioner to have a real-time conversation. So the satisfaction of that was very high. Now, granted, that was for a very limited domain of questions, but the depth of the questions was very deep within that domain, and the customer satisfaction was very high. So I think we all have, we expect that technology and the capability that Niloy talked about in terms of what goes on behind the scenes to operate that and make it work is going to get better and better.
That's amazing. That's a great story. Yeah, I mean, I think these are some great examples, guys. I think I'm super excited just to see what else is the art of possible. Some of the the innovation, I think, is not obvious to the average consumer, right? Because a lot of it is happening on the back end. In that example you just gave, right? Maybe there's a persona, if you will, an avatar in front of it, but oftentimes it is something that's more coaching oriented that should also provide an indirect benefit to consumers alike, right? So I'm personally very excited, just not because of the technology field that we're in, but I think from society perspective, there's a lot of opportunity just to improve, at least hopefully have a more patient experience with some of our customer service industry folks. All right, let's wrap up. We have a few minutes left for Q&A. I know that there's been some Q&A that have come in already. If you have still a question, it could be about any of the things we talked about, could be about some things we didn't talk about. We're game. I think we're all up for the challenge if you want to try to stump the panelists here. I have one question. I think we touched on it a little bit. Our organization has lots of data spread all over clouds, on-prem, etc. Let's see. Most solution providers assume that everything needs to be centralized, but that's just not feasible for us. How does AI Factory help us without a massive, costly data migration project? So Niloy, I think you touched on this a little bit with some of the hybrid designs, but maybe you can just summarize again for the audience in case they missed that early on.
No, that's exactly it, right? Is the approach is you don't have to move your data, right? That we now have technologies available to us, and the field is continuing to emerge and evolve. Just in the last few weeks, protocols like MCP and ACP that are standardizing the way agents talk to each other have emerged. So yes, everybody in the industry is committed towards helping you not have to move your data. And VAST and Deloitte in our S2S offering here are certainly committed to that, right? So our thesis is you don't have to move all of your data, certainly don't have to move any data in order to get started, right? We can start working with data just exactly where it sits. And then over time, will there, even though there will be some data movement, the volume of data movement is far reduced compared to traditional approaches. Steve, if you want to add something.
Yeah, so Nilay gave you the good news. I'm going to give you the bad news. The bad news is that I'm willing to bet, and it's been my experience at most enterprises I work with, that when you have data that's that spread out, it's across multiple archetypes in multiple places, it's likely repeated many places. And so that you still have the hard work to do of rationalizing your data and cleaning your data so that as you put AI models over it, you know what the right source of the truth is. So the technologies that Deloitte and VAST is bringing to market helps you tremendously with that, but it doesn't solve the problem of actually I've got to have good data governance. I've got to clean data. I have a set of data that's consistent and not duplicated, so that as I train models, I know exactly the right data to point it at. So that work still needs to happen. Now, back to Nilay's point, you can still start a lot of this journey, even though that work is in process, because the work I just enunciated is a never-ending journey that doesn't end. You always have to have constantly good data management and governance, so that your data sets are well taken care of, and you know exactly where the truth is, and you're getting duplicity and bad data out of the system.
Couldn't agree more.
I think you both are right. So it's good. I think the reality is that you don't want to move your data, but there's also probably duplicate data. And so having that single logical view of data, regardless of where it physically sits, is super important, right? I think that's it in a nutshell. All right, one more question. We have some investments already in AI infrastructure. We're still working through some performance and operational challenges. Does AI Factory integrate with any of our existing investments? Maybe that's a open-ended question, but how would you guys go about answering that for a customer in that situation, guys?
I would have a few more questions about the nature of their challenges, to be honest. But I'll take a whack at it. A couple of different ideas. One is if you've got a good handle on where your compute and data is happening now across all the different archetypes that you have in your environment right now, do you have a common way of visibility across them, or do you have to look at them individually? And so one of the things that AI Factory does is not only from a data perspective do you see across environments from a data perspective, to Nilay's point, but also from a compute perspective. We have partnered with Run AI to make sure you can see all of your compute resources across multiple archetypes, how they're being utilized, who's using them, what's the performance of those. So for example, if you have data and compute in the cloud, data and compute on-prem, and potentially data and compute across multiple clouds, one of the things that we did with AI Factory was give you the ability to see all across all of those in terms of how GPUs are being allocated and utilized. And in fact, have a common performance benchmark across all your archetypes. So that's just one thought, as well as how we can help there. And then the other thing we do with our AI Factory is we actually offer to clients to take some of their data and use cases, put it into our factory, our optimized factory, and we'll run it for you to show you what kind of an optimized environment, how quickly it can run. And you can benchmark that against what you're seeing in your environment.
Yeah, it's one thing I'll say is that is where our partnership with NVIDIA and NIMS and NEMO across all the parties is so critical, right? Because it's early stages, it's early days for AI applications still. And one of the important things for, I think, everybody to recognize is that portability of applications is going to be very important. In most cases, as Steve said at the very onset, you have started your POC, your initial development in one environment. I think the timing is ideal if you're looking at this and thinking about production scaling to say, okay, now how do I take that work that I've done and get that converted into a more portable framework so that I can deploy it across all these various environments. And that's exactly what AI Factory does, right? So it's not about replacing or redoing any of your current work. It's about taking that initial work that you've done and said, okay, now how do we deploy this in a manner that's very portable?
All right, we're out of time, so we're going to wrap up here. Thanks again, Deloitte, Steve. Pleasure as always. Good seeing you both, and look forward to seeing you both next week at
Looking forward
GTC.
to it.
And for those of you who are hearing this and will be at GTC next week, please stop by. Both Deloitte and VAST have large presence. We have a couple of events as well that we're hosting together, so we'd love to see you in person and talk more, and maybe show you some other examples live at our booths. So thank you all for attending. We hope you all have a wonderful week and a great GTC if you're attending.